So I'm glad that
which
you
has
brought
been
that
a
up about the mistrial. So you go in there and you go before Kim Gasperson, and what does she ask you? Like, why does she not really move forward? What does she ask you kind of right off the bat?
well, her attorney wasn't here, and she was doing calendar call, and she called. She said Smith versus Smith. I stood up and said present, and she asked if I had an attorney. I said no, I fired my attorney. And she asked if I wanted an attorney present. I said no, I did not wish to have an attorney. She said, well, you have to have an attorney. Or you need an attorney to represent you. I said, I don't know how to represent myself. I'm present at court as a man. And she asked me two more times, and she flopped her head around and rolled her eyes and puffed and puffed. And right after that, my former attorney hadn't sent over the documents to remove himself as the attorney of record. And I actually had a copy of it from where I went and picked all of my documents up. So I gave it to her. And they notarized, or they signed it and stamped it and everything. And then a little while later, she come back from Chambers, and she called me back up and said she was going to declare a mistrial, and that the other party would have to re-notice me if they wished to start all over again.
And was that like mistrial? Was that ever declared upon the record? Like, was there something that was put in saying that there was a mistrial?
No, there was no paperwork
Was
filed, and that section of the audio from court that day was not in the recording.
you mean that it was taken out of the public recording?
Yes, there was about an hour section during that time that was. It says paused, is what it says on the disc when you pull it up.
This is why I think everybody should record court all the time, and I think they should actually have recording devices that are made public for court, because things like this happen, and they don't happen all the time. But when it does happen, it can cause some problems and some troubles.
In my experience so far, it seems to have proved beneficial to have it on recording myself, or to receive the recording myself.
So then you go back and was that thing with DSS, because you were like, she kept on calling DSS, or somebody kept on calling DSS. Of course, that's all confidential and anonymous, but it was also kind of ridiculous. And when I was talking to you, you had talked to me one time and said that DSS had just left, and I was like, whoa, don't ever communicate with them. Don't really talk to them, especially if they're investigating you. We kind of had a conversation about it. And then it was maybe like half a week to a week later when they called you back. And first they did a safety assessment or a risk
Yes,
assessment.
when they come the first time. It's a safety and risk.
Yeah, they did safety assessment, and then they called you back, and they were needing to come out again to do a risk assessment before they could close out the case, right?
One way or the other, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, they wanted to
I
come
don't
back.
remember the exact details. And then we were talking about it, so we went ahead and wrote up a letter. And because the property only has one right of way, of course, we required them to bring a warrant and a secured bond, and we would meet them up at the gate armed like Nazis. And if they had the right paperwork, they could come in and do their business, right?
Right.
So, but instead, when you called the DSS agent just to cancel, what happened?
She had already planned on canceling. She was incorrect. She didn't have to come back.
They didn't have to come back. That's the first time I think I've ever heard them say, nope, we don't have to do our job.
Well, she was the first one that wanted to come back. I had already dealt with CPS twice, well, 3 times in the past. Twice when they come to the house. No, once when they came to my house, and they never wanted to come back for a follow-up. And then the week after that, somebody called again, and that time I met her at her office. I didn't afford her the chance to come to my house.
Yeah, but just for the sake of safety, look, DSS's only kind of job is to take children or make your life miserable. So unless you wish for your life to be miserable or for your children to be taken, there's just no reason to talk with them, work with them, deal with them. It's a free country. You don't have to participate. Um, so just throwing that out there for everybody. Now, when you went back to court, so the first time Kim declared it a mistrial, what happened the second time when you went back? Was Tamara there that time, or was the opposing attorney there that time?
Yes, she was there. We actually got
Because if
started
she,
with the hearing. Go ahead.
well, and if she wasn't there, you were just going to be like failure to prosecute, throw this thing out, right?
That was the plan.
So just so everybody knows, and that's what he was going to do the first time, but before he really got to it, Kim had already declared it a mistrial.
Yeah.
So now we're back again. She's there. She's not really ready to go. What happens?
We got started and done pretty much the exact same thing that we had done in December of last year, except this time she was trying to get me to go back and incriminate myself from stuff that I had said in the December hearing, and I couldn't answer a lot of it because I couldn't remember it, and I hadn't re-listened to the audio from that hearing because we thought we were starting over because a mistrial had been declared.
Right.
And
Didn't you bring that up with them?
yes, at the end of the day.
And what did they say about that?
Well, I asked to have that recording placed upon the record, and they freaked out.
You asked to have what
wanted to
recording
know
placed upon the record?
the recording of the mistrial.
Okay, so you had a recording of them saying that it was a mistrial, but they didn't have any paperwork to back that up, and you wished to place the recording that was cut out of the public record onto their record, and then they freaked out?
And if I'm not mistaken, Dean, the judicial officer, he didn't want to have no part of it. The opposing attorney was like, how did you get a recording? And he asked the same thing, and we went through all that. And then when we were trying to schedule us back in, he wanted to get back in front of another judicial officer while she was in criminal court since there was a recording now.
Yeah, and didn't the other attorney, the opposing attorney, weren't they wishing to have you held in contempt for having the recording?
No, she's the one that suggested we go to criminal if there was a recording.
Yeah, because she was trying to have you held, or charged for making a recording in the court, right?
Probably so. She didn't say that, but I'm sure that's why she was persistent about going to criminal court next.
So, and then, well, I also think that another thing that had to do with is the fact that that court was being held in like 2 days, so it was just postponed for about 48 hours. And it was also going back in front of the same judicial officer who heard the beginning of this thing back in December or last December.
Yes. Well, they renoticed this. She got a date, and it was actually 3 days later. And then we got in front of that judicial officer, and the opposing attorney started out with wanting to bring up the recording. And the judicial officer said, "Oh yeah, the recording." And she started harping on me about how you can't do that. And she almost said that it was against the law, and she caught herself. And she just backed off and said, "Well, we just don't do that. We have our own procedure and our own recording devices." And that was when I brought up the fact that it wasn't on the audio. There was no paperwork filed in the file because she was the one that declared the mistrial. We went back to her. And after that, it became an issue on time. I had filed a notice for almost like a discovery period trying to get the exhibits that she had, the opposing attorney had, that she was trying to use against me. She refused. And so that judicial officer, after the whole recording incident was laid to rest, it all of a sudden become a time and scheduling issue, and it was continued again.
And she basically didn't want to hear it. I mean, that's the way it sounded to me in the recording. Oracle was
Yeah.
actually there. What did you think, Oracle?
Well, the whole dynamics of that hearing was really interesting anyway, certainly because of the other attorney and the way she was acting. But I think the most humorous and shocking part of all of it was when Alan had mentioned about the mistrial, and there was obviously nothing there in the paperwork, and it was a setup because they knew previously that it wasn't in there. But it did come out that there was a recording, and it was, shock and awe in the courtroom that there was a recording. And
Yes.
as soon as that was found out, that there definitely is a recording, and it was asked of Alan, did you do the recording? And he said no, and it was sent to me from who? Well, it was just sent to me. So they knew they were not going to get an answer out of Alan, which was interesting. They didn't pursue it. They seemed to want to hurry up and get this quickly out of the courtroom. Kim Gasperson Justice was really shocked that there was a recording. I mean, I'm not sure if it was embarrassment or whatever, but she immediately wanted to get this out of her courtroom. And it went back and forth as to who else was going to handle this, and it ended up going back to, Gene Johnson, because Kim Gasperson Justice didn't want to handle it.
And just so everybody kind of knows and has some background on this, this is happening at the same courthouse where I got arrested with Baba. And
with Baba.
Kim Gasperson used to be the high clerk of that courthouse. And before we went in, just kind of as a courtesy, because I've done this a lot, I went in and made an appointment with Kim Gasperson, her being the high clerk. And we had probably about a 45-minute conversation before I went in with Henry. And, at the end of that conversation, when we're walking out and we're talking, well, I was kind of talking about the history of law and what law is. She was just like, well, you know a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, she did say that. Mm-hmm. So she ends up being one of the judges in Henderson, Transylvania, and Polk County.
So I'm sure that when Alan was sitting there talking about how he's a man present, he doesn't know how to represent himself or represent himself, that probably clued her off a little bit, like,
Mm-hmm.
There's only a few people I know who would say that.
Well, I think that she initially was irritated and knew that at some point she couldn't pursue it any further. There were other people in the courtroom, and I think that when the courtroom is cleared out and it's just your case being heard, they'll tend to be a lot freer. But when other people are listening and hearing, and they want to hurry up and skedaddle it out of the courtroom, or put it towards the end of the day, or on a day when no one else is usually there.
That's probably why they don't like being recorded so much. So this happens with Kim, and then y'all set up a time. This is the third time you've been back. You're sitting there saying, hey, I don't wish to come back. I work late nights. This is taking up my time, wasting my time. And they pretty much say, okay, we're going to set up a time, make sure that this is going to be heard. And it took a couple of weeks to get that date put into place, right?
After the recording matter was settled, it became a matter that day of time. And then she was very, very accommodating to my schedule after that. She let me pick the day.
Yeah. And in fact, they wanted...
What day would you like? What was that, Oracle?
Yeah, I said, in fact, they wanted to bring it before a different judge on a different day to get it heard a little quicker, and I had just kind of suggested that it would be good if you go back to seeing Gene Johnson. He's a very patient judge. He has a good reputation. And I thought it'd be best to go back there, and of course, Alan, kind of thought about it, looked at his schedule, and it worked better to be able to be there when Gene Johnson was there. But they were very accommodating to try to work out along with the schedule that Alan has. They really went out of their way to be able to get a court date that would be accommodating to him.
Well, and just so that everybody kind of knows, because we keep talking about Gene, but one of the things is Gene was one of probably the only halfway decent attorneys that worked and helped Baba
Absolutely,
on what was going on before Oracle and Baba had met myself. So he won election last year. He ran as a judicial officer in Henderson County because he knows how that jurisdiction is, and to everybody's amazement, he won election and got another corrupt judicial officer out of there. So he's fairly new to being a judicial officer, and has only been judicial officer for about 10 months, I guess.
Yeah,
9
and in
months.
reality, he seemed to come up from obscurity, and when he was put on the ballot, it was a really good sign. I believe he took over Mac McKellar, and it was pretty shocking for some people to realize that he was voted in and Mac McKellar was voted out, who was also there short term as one of the judges who did a fill-in, So it was pretty hopeful and promising when Gene Johnson, won the vote to be the presiding judge there. So I took it as a good sign.
My experience with him so far has been really good.
So now we know for sure when the court date's set. We know for sure it's going to be heard. We know for sure that they don't like recordings. And they definitely don't like being called out when you record it and they don't have it recorded. So, and the day that everything was set to go on was October 5th, and that was yesterday. And for this, I just knew that I had to go up there and be there because they probably already had a pretty good clue just by some of the things he was doing, some of the things he was saying, some of what the paperwork read. I'm sure that they knew I was somewhere in the background. So I decided to just go up there. And it's the first time I probably walked into that building since I got arrested with Henry.
Yeah.
And as soon as we go in there, Oracle, how did that first officer look at me when they saw me coming up to the metal detector?
Yeah, there's one particular officer who's usually there. I think he's with the sheriff's department, and it was kind of interesting when he took a look at John, then he took a look at me, and then it's like the light bulb went off, like, okay, they're here.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely tell he recognized me. I'm pretty sure I have a picture in the back, because when I was up in that courtroom, man, the cop was staring me down the whole time. Like, I just pulled my phone out of my pocket, and he was like, nope, you're not doing that in here.
Yep.
You better put that phone up or you're going to leave one way or another.
And, of course, before the hearing started, they make it at every single hearing or trial, they absolutely let you know that you cannot record anything at all.
They were quite adamant yesterday about reminding everybody about not recording.
So we go up there and they had somebody, they just had some quick business. Y'all were up by what, 9:30, 9:25?
It was right after 9. It was right after 9. Because, he called me up to the front.
I know that they had like those two things to handle before they called that case, because there was somebody there who they were all like, he was like, did you go and take that drug test? And she was like, I never got it. I think it was about 9:25 because we got in there about 9 o'clock, and I think they had two little hearings before we got up, but they were really quick. I don't remember what it was about. I just remember that one girl saying that she didn't have the order to go take the drug test. I was like, yeah, I bet Tamara told her to say that.
I think she tells her clients to do a lot of things, not do a lot of things they're supposed to do.
Yeah, right? Tells them to violate court orders, take children, had all the incriminating evidence. I actually learned something new, and I was kind of surprised because as soon as it really kind of got started, she called Alan up to the stand, and he took his notes, and it had everything written down. You know, it was the notes from the calls that we had. So he basically had his entire legal strategy written down. And she's like, I'd like to look at that. And he looks at the judicial officer and he's like, do I have to give it to her? And he's like, you brought it up to the stand. So, and when he said that, I was like, well, this makes sense as a common law rule, because most of the people that you bring up to the stand, you have subpoenaed them, and you've also subpoenaed their records. So if you subpoena their records, obviously you would have the right to look at it. And of course, you know, Alan hasn't been doing this long and didn't really think to be like, hey, this is my entire legal strategy. What about I'll write down what's relevant to the questioning part? So, but she goes, takes them back. She was about to take a picture of them, and he was like, I didn't say you could take pictures. The judicial officer was like, I didn't say you could take pictures. I just said you could look at them. And I think everybody was kind of worried. The main reason I wasn't worried was because she wasn't writing enough notes for me to be worried. She was just writing a couple of notes. And you want to tell everybody what she asked you from your notes?
Her number one question was if I was going to be ambiguous. And yeah. And then she asked when I was going to be ambiguous or why I would be ambiguous. And I kind of just steered away from her question. And then her next big question was, and she really harped on, was who helped me prepare my notes. Because she was trying to get me to start naming names, because I'm like, John, I think there might be a picture of him somewhere. And she was trying to get me to start naming names because we had 6 people there yesterday. And she was wanting me to get on the record saying who was helping me. And I kind of just steered clear away from that, too. I asked her what the relevance was. I told her that everybody helped me, because everybody
kid help you?
Pretty much. That's what she was wanting me to say. And I said, you know, everybody helped me prepare my notes. Everybody has an opinion on this. And I've been studying law. I never would name any names specifically for her.
I just thought it was hilarious when she was talking about the ambiguous thing. And she's like, well, because it says here in your notes, always be ambiguous. And man, the judicial officer is just looking at her like, you're an attorney, right?
It was
like
funny.
Every attorney tells every client, you know, everybody knows to always be ambiguous. What's that got to do with anything?
If I would have thought on my feet, I would have found a way to work it around to where, well, I'm sure you tell your clients to be ambiguous.
Yeah, it's really easy to think about comebacks, you know,
after
couple
the
hours
fact
later, right?
Yeah.
Like thinking on your feet like that is very difficult to do, you know, especially you're in there, it's stressful. And Alan really did a good job of, because one of the things that I find is the hardest thing to get past working with people is, for the most part, like subconsciously, the way our society's set up, everybody who goes into court is instilled with this fear of somebody who's comfortable enough, a man who's comfortable enough with his sexuality to wear a dress, a black dress, and get on a stage every day. And you know, once you kind of get that out of the way, once you get their personage and you realize that they're just a man, like below that personage is just a man, once you get the fear of the personage out of the way, it's a lot easier. And I remember when I was doing my first things, and of course when I was learning law, like I was going to go sue people with common law, which is a much different thing. And typically they're going to ask you to explain the law and really break it down. And that's how they caught me up the first time. So before I went back the next time, I just started talking to everybody all the time about what law is and how it works. And my thought is that whenever I get in there and I get asked this, I'm just going to speak to him like I speak to everybody else, just to overcome that kind of subconscious fear of a man in a black dress. Yeah, but Alan did a really, really good job of just, being calm, cool, collected, knowing what to say at the appropriate time, not saying too much, because that's another big problem I think a lot of people have is that sometimes they'll go in there and they'll just say too much. They'll want to argue with everything. And especially in kind of the sovereign citizen movement, they'll try and act smarter than the judge. Never read a judge case law, that they know case law better than you do. And if they think that something applies, they have Westlaw right there on their computer. They know how to look it up really, really quick. So that might come in a little farther down the story. Anyways, so what was kind of the things that she was harping on you about with the contracts?
My cousin being the notary, she was really harping on the fact that it was my first cousin. There was a date that had been written in when we had it notarized, and she was harping on that because it was in one copy of the separation agreement and not the other. And then in one copy of the separation agreement, there were 2 pages that were added in that wasn't in the original that was filed at the county recorder's office. And it was obvious that the signatures on those pages were not mine. And on top of that, the actual documents themselves were not the same format, font, or layout. And she was trying to get me to tell her why and where those pages came from. And I don't know where or why they came from because they just appeared.
Well, and I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like, do you have to have an attorney give you independent legal advice and look over your entire contract before it becomes effective and you're able to execute it?
Oh,
I mean,
I'm
is
sorry.
that part of contract law somewhere?
Well, I didn't say that. Those pages that manifested were an attorney acknowledgement page for both of us, for me and the ex. And these were exhibits that she had brought into court that neither myself or my former attorney had, other than in the discovery period. But no, those pages should not have mattered whether it had been a signature or whether or not they would have been in the private contract, because there was nothing from the private contract on those pages. They were purely acknowledgement pages where we had sought out independent legal counsel to go over the private contract with an attorney.
That's scandalous, huh?
Well, I mean, one of my favorite things is she kept on harping. What did your cousin do before signing?
On those pages, it says in the section of the explanation of the page, it says attorney. Well, she was notarizing it, so she marked through the word attorney and put notary public, and then she she certified them and everything like that and signed them. So after the fact of the December hearing, we actually went through her notary public handbook and found in there where that's exactly what she was supposed to do. And while we were at court in December, she had the notary on the stand, and she was trying to defame her character and kept asking if she was an attorney and if she could do that and if she was an attorney or why did you do that. And then she went in trying to defame her character.
And it was absolutely hilarious because she's sitting there talking about her scratching out attorney and putting notary. And she's like, you are aware that there are certain things that a notary cannot acknowledge and an attorney has to, correct? And he's like, no, I'm not an attorney. I don't know how that stuff works. And then she brings up like the example that's given in the North Carolina statutes for how to write a durat. And that's just an example given. The actual statute will say what the elements are for a durat. And
yeah,
she's like, well, is that the same wording as what's on there?
And I looked at it and I told the judicial officer, I don't know what this means. I'm not a notary. I know it wasn't what was in her handbook.
And it's not your job. And what does it matter? Like at common law, you don't even have to have a notary. You just have to have two or more witnesses witness a contract. And in fact, like if this weren't dealing with a divorce, which of course the state's involved in because of the marriage contract, that's how they make themselves a party. And in a private contract between man and man, where the state isn't a party, you don't have to have a notary sign it. And it's good to have witnesses to it, because if there's any type of conflict with the contract, it would just be he said, she said, your word against theirs. And that's why you have witnesses, is because the witnesses can come in as a third party, that's neutral and say, whoa, I was there, I saw this, I heard the negotiations, whatever. But the fact, you don't have to have an attorney just to execute a private contract that everybody agrees upon. That's just silly.